Lee, so can everybody hear me?
Yeah, I just made sure you're co-host, so.
Okay, thank you, Wayne. We're going to start this evening's presentation with some questions for our speaker, Lee Goldman Kikel. So welcome, Lee. And to start off, what prompted you to write the book?
Todd, before you ask me my first question, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody, the members of the Squirrel Hill Historical Society, for inviting me tonight to talk about my book, my father's life, and my writing process. It's a real honor to be here. And I just wanted, before we start our first question, I just wanted to say I want to give a little bit of history about myself. I grew up in Squirrel Hill. I lived on South Negley Avenue, right around the corner from Whiteman School. I was in the last 6th grade class at Whiteman School, and I was in the last 7th and 8th grade class that went to Alderdice. My family moved when I was in 10th grade to Beacon Street near Shenley Park. Jewelry store was on Darlington Road and Murray Avenue on the 2nd floor, and it was called Lee Trading Company. My father's office faced Murray Avenue, and it looked out next to the Manor Theater's marquee. Years later, a lot of you will remember in the 1990s, Barnes & Noble moved in on Murray Avenue. The children's section was where my father's office had been. It was a bittersweet memory for me visiting the 2nd floor at Barnes & Noble and remembering my father and lots of great years. I have fond memories of going up street to our jewelry business, to the Manor and Squirrel Hill theaters, and going to Frick Park, playing soccer with my dad. Very good times. My family still spends a lot of time in Squirrel Hill. My son Jason loves the sidewalks. We have no sidewalks in Hampton, and we enjoy the diversity of the neighborhood. My husband John and I had many dates in Squirrel Hill, and we continue to enjoy time spent in the neighborhood. The 3 of us still go to the movies, and we like going to eat at our favorite pizza places and shopping on Forbes and Murray. And even though things have evolved, it's always a treat for us to go to Squirrel Hill. And Todd, I'm ready.
Okay, well, Lee, what prompted you to write the book?
What prompted me to write the book? My father, Melvin Goldman, was born on January 21st, 1923 in Łódź, Poland. He was a Holocaust survivor. He recorded his story on 10 cassette tapes in the late 1970s. It took wisdom and foresight to tell his story. My father said that it tore and wrenched his heart to relive his life, his trauma, and his painful experiences. He was imprisoned and used as slave labor, witnessing incomprehensible atrocities and recalling how his family had been murdered. My father hoped that someone would put his story into a book. I felt I needed to honor his wishes and put his words onto paper. And with so few survivors alive, these stories need to be preserved and told.
And to what extent was writing the book therapeutic for you and for any of your family members?
Well, it was, I have to admit, it was more emotional for me than I thought. I was able to learn a lot about my father's experiences and see more of the man he was. I was happy to hear about my father's pre-war life, the descriptions of Dad's growing up, and all about his parents, siblings, and his extended family. There was my father's love of school, family traditions, vacations, and details about my grandfather's sheet metal business. Both sides of my father's family had been in the metal business for over 400 years. So that was new to me. My grandfather did custom ornamental work, and he had numerous patents, including seamless metal containers, and he made an air purifying machine that lessened the chances of tuberculosis for factory workers. There were descriptions of Łódź and the surrounding areas, and many details of my father's life up until the late 1970s. My research led me to do some extensive genealogy. My father had a lot of documentation, and I accumulated much more. I have documents stating where our family lived. I have information about the family's deportation. I chronicled my father's journey from his home in Łódź, the Łódź ghetto, concentration camps, liberation, hospitals and treatment, training for employment, coming to the US, and Pittsburgh, to be specific. I learned that my father was encouraged to come to Pittsburgh because of the similarity to his home city. They were both manufacturing and industrial cities, and he was told that he would be guaranteed to find a job. I learned about the kindness of others through many stories that my father told, and I learned more about my father's strength and his abiding humanity. He loved school and he loved learning. My dad came over, he did not know any English. He learned English at night school in Pittsburgh, then took industrial engineering, went on to the Gemological Institute of America, and in his later years, my father attended college at Pitt. He was always learning. My father was also an accomplished jeweler. My sadness came while finishing the last chapter of my book, The Tree of Life Massacre. I was shocked and stunned, and I realized again how there is so much hate and violence in the world. My joy came from finding new family. I thought I had none. I discovered two cousins who were born and raised in Sweden. Their fathers were also born in Łódź and were cousins of my father. These men survived the Holocaust and moved to Sweden to start their new lives. John, Jason, and I met our new cousins, Lily and Fanny, on a trip to Europe in 2018, and we happily keep in touch. The last part of my book is a large appendix. I have a treasure trove of ephemera from my father and from my research, which includes pictures, postcards, chronological order of camps and hospitals. I have baggage tickets, naturalization papers, and so much more. This journey also reminds me to remember my family and everyone who perished every day. They have no voice but us.
Did you have any reservations, Lee, about writing the book?
Yes, my only reservation was that I never wrote a book before. I wanted to get it right. I needed help to thread my material together, which included the tapes, various testimonies from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and Yad Vashem, documentation, and what I learned directly from my father. My son Jason asked a professor he knew from college what she thought, and she knew someone from Morgantown who has a business helping clients prepare their publications, and she helped me thread things together, which was invaluable.
And how well has the book been received?
I would say my book has been well received. I self-published in 2019. I do hope to find a publisher. The material in my book I feel is relevant today. There is continued upheaval, hate, and genocide in the world. And my father's story also carries hope, tenacity, and perseverance. My book right now is in bookstores, Holocaust centers, museums, both national and international. schools, and there is interest from military organizations because of the descriptions I have about the 82nd Airborne Division and military doctors and nurses. And I feel that it's important for historians and anyone interested in human behavior. Also, I always ask for feedback on my book, and many people have told me that they feel that Melvin was speaking directly to them as they read part one, which is all in his words. My father always made you feel like you were the focus.
And Lee, what plans do you have for promoting the book going forward 3 years after the initial publication?
I have been promoting on my own. I continue to reach out to places like I already mentioned. And the pandemic gave me a bump in the road. My book came out summer of 2019. I had some speaking engagements and book signings lined up, and I had to wait until spring 2020 to begin to set things up again. Last April, I gave a talk via Zoom to the Shaler Library's author series. And this past May, I taught a class on Zoom for Osher Lifelong Learning through their WVU campus. And what was really nice and exciting for me was this was the first class they ever offered that related to the Holocaust. I'm working on becoming a generational speaker for the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh, and I will continue to tell my father's story. Today, I am still overcome trying to fathom how anyone could endure such depravity and not let him be defined by it. I feel that my father was definitely a man of hope. My father went through unimaginable horrors and was not bitter toward his fellow human beings. He was tolerant, accepting of others, and he treated people the way he wanted to be treated. And I feel if he could live like that after all he experienced, others can too. His life reminds us that beside being commanded to remember, we're forbidden to despair. My father's story is one of survival and definitely beating the odds. He had hope, tenacity, and perseverance. My father struggled and won. Once he began to recuperate, he promised himself he would learn as much as he could and work hard and become the best person he could be. Melvin found his place in life and left a lasting influence on those who knew him. And I hope my book carries his influence to others. And now we have some slides to share.
Wayne or Tony, it said that host disabled participant screen sharing. So I'm not able to share my screen. Okay, all right.
That better?
Yes. Can everybody see that now?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay.
All right, so slide
Great,
one. Are you ready for me, Todd?
Yes, I am, Lee.
Okay, so slide one it shows the cover of my book, and what's significant to people in Squirrel Hill. This is early 1951, and my father is standing on the porch where he rented a room on Denniston Avenue. This next slide, my father was born Vyacheslav Goldman. It was changed when he came to the United States. And this is a picture. He was 12 years old at the time. It was his 6th grade photo. And this photo was found after the war by my dad's only surviving brother, Aaron. It was found in the chimney at the house where they lived before the war. And you can see that the picture looks like it was charred. This picture is Łódź, Poland, where my father was born and lived. And it's a pre-war photo. And you can see the industry and manufacturing in the city as well. This is a photo of my father. He's on the top right, the oldest. He was the oldest of 7 siblings. This is on vacation in the Cherry Mountains around 1936 or 1937. And Mieczysław's siblings were Rajza, Aaron, Chayasora, Natan, Labe, and Joseph. And they were a very close family. This next picture is another picture of the family on vacation from 1934, Melvin and his siblings. And the significance about these last 2 photos, they had been sent to Argentina by my grandmother before the war. She sent it to her sister who had escaped. And these photos were sent to my father after he got to the United States. And had my grandmother not sent these to her sister, my dad would have had nothing that resembled his family. Next photo is Freedom Square on the left-hand side. That's in the city of Łódź. It was the town square. And the Kosciuszko Monument is there. The city archives are there. And it looks pretty much the same. We were there a number of years ago. On the right is the Great Synagogue, which was built in 1881. And it was a Reformed synagogue. And it was burned down to the ground in 1939. And they lost the Torah scrolls as well. The Green Market is a shopping area, and that photo is from around the 1920s or 1930s. And the photo on the right is Nadlodka Street, which was another shopping area. Gives you an idea of what their city looked like. This next photo is the Altstadt Synagogue. And the Goldman family belonged to this synagogue. It translates to Old Town Synagogue, and it was Orthodox. And apparently they had 1,500 seats, 36 Torah scrolls, and this one was destroyed in 1939 as well. And this is the Stary Rynek, or Old Market, and it was a gathering place. You can see all the hustle bustle. It was rebuilt after World War II, and I looked this up. It says no longer a marketplace after like the late 20s. On the left, the Zielony Rynek, which is a green market, another photo of a market. And on the right, Pietrkowska Street, which is the main street in Łódź. And it's a very long commercial street. And even today, it is a major tourist attraction. These 2 photos, my father on the left and the one on the right, he's the second one from the right. 1946 and 1947. On the left, he's with some of the orphans at one of the rehab facilities he wound up working in. And on the right, he's with some friends that he met during his rehab. And this next one I call Post-War Travels. It's my father with one of his doctors, and then at the settlement, waiting to emigrate. And my father left for the United States in December of 1950. It took him 5 years to rehabilitate enough that he could travel and come to the States. And he came, like I said, late in 50, right after the big snowstorm. And this is a wedding photo of my parents, Melvin and Mildred, March 6, 1954. And they got married. I don't know if anybody, you can tell me if you do recall, the Shady Hotel. And this is a picture of my father when he got his citizenship, March of 1956, which he said was one of the happiest days of his life. A couple other pictures of my dad. The one on the right is in Squirrel Hill, early 50s, again on Denniston Avenue. And these are some pictures of my father and me on South Negley and at the Pittsburgh Zoo. That's the photo in the middle. My father loved animals and nature, and any occasion to go to the zoo or to go to Phipps Conservatory, he was there. Another photo of my father on South Negley, and the picture on the top right is my father and mother at our store, Lee Trading Company. And the one on the bottom, I think everybody will recognize, the Manor Theater. And at that time, the National Record Mart was on the corner. We were on Darlington and Murray. And this photo is from 1970. And the movie that was playing at the time was called The Song of Norway. And on the Manor's marquee, it said that they had matinees daily. And also, if you look to the left, I don't know how many of you remember Friedman's Men's Clothing Store. And this is a picture, another happy day. It was my bat mitzvah in 1971. And the top right is a wedding photo. My husband, John, and I, and my dad, who's beaming, and my mother-in-law and my mother. And the bottom right, my parents and my family. And this next photo is my dad. I'm guessing it's around somewhere in the mid to late 70s, around the time that he was recording his story. The picture on the left is my husband, John, is in the back, myself and our son, Jason, and then Ronald and Fanny. Fanny is one of the cousins that I found that lives in Sweden. And this is taken in Gothenburg, Sweden. And the photo on the right is our cousin, Lily, standing with my son, Jason, in Amsterdam. The last two photos are letters. They're pictures of letters. My father wrote a letter in 1982 to Lieutenant General James Gavin, thanking him for saving his life in 1945. My father had this letter hanging on his office wall until he retired. General Gavin was part of the 82nd Airborne Division, and they were the ones that liberated my father. The letter that my father wrote to him was the only piece of correspondence that I could not find. And I found it after my book came out. With some help, we found a military archive in Carlisle, PA, that had General Gavin's boxes and boxes and boxes of correspondence. And it was an amazing find to see what my dad wrote in this letter to Lieutenant General Gavin. He thanked him for saving his life, and he also told him what he had been doing for the past 40 years. And my dad described the day that the two of them made eye contact. My dad was in an ambulance being transported to a hospital, and he was near death. And that's the letter that my dad wrote.
Well, thank you, Lee, for a most informative presentation. I'll stop the screen share, but how did your father get to Pittsburgh?
He was in numerous rehab facilities. He was liberated in May of 1945, very near death. Most of the people that were found with him they perished. And he was first in the English zone and then transferred to the American zone. And he was in just very, very bad shape. He was declared almost 80% disabled. And after many years of being in rehab, he decided it was time to figure out where to go. And he and his only surviving brother talked about it, and it was suggested that they come to Pittsburgh. And so my dad's brother came in 1949. And when my dad was well enough and proved that he could work and sustain on his own, he was able to figure out that it was time to, apply. And it's a very, very long process. And he finally came to Pittsburgh late in 50.
And did he work for somebody else, or did he start the business immediately?
He did not start the business immediately. He didn't know English. He started to learn English, and eventually he ran into a few people. He worked selling watches and various products. He kind of went door to door for a while. And as time went on, he decided he really would like to be in business by himself. And so by 1960, he and my mother opened their business. They had saved up some money, and he started with wallets and luggage and costume jewelry. And he eventually went to the Gemological Institute of America, learned diamond setting and stone setting, and he became an accomplished jeweler.
And was he active in the Squirrel Hill community as a merchant?
As a merchant, he was very active. He was a workaholic. Once he started the business, it was work, work, and work. He was not involved with anything related to the Holocaust or he knew some survivors, but it was very painful for him. He really never talked about his experiences until I was maybe late in high school or early college. But he was a well-known and respected merchant in Squirrel Hill.
Are there other questions that members of the audience have?
I would remind anyone who wants to ask a question to unmute themselves. You can.
Can I ask, what camp was he in? Do you know?
Well, the family was in Łódź, and it was a very large ghetto. And when July of 1944, they were transported to Auschwitz. And the whole family, my grandparents and my dad and all of his siblings. And when they got to Auschwitz, my dad and one brother were sent one way, and everyone else was sent the other way. And that's the last time my dad ever saw anybody again. And then in November of 44, my dad luckily got on a transport to another camp. So he was in some other camps as well. The last camp he was in was Ravensbrück, which was mostly a women's camp. But that was near the end of the war. So he was in a few places, and then many facilities after liberation.
Lee, did your father have a chance to visit the Holocaust Museum in Washington before he passed away?
He did not. When they opened it, he could not bring himself to go. My family has been there, but my dad did not make it there.
I have two questions. Was Łódź a part of the Pale of Settlement? And if so, how did the business, the metal business, last for 400 years. And what was the name of the metal business?
Oh, I'm looking at my son for asking about this Pale of Settlement, but I think it was outside of it. Some of our family was from Łódź, and my grandmother's family was from Koinski, and they were all in the metal business, from what I understand, with
Wow.
stoves and ornamental work and roofing. And those are the bits and pieces that I've put together.
My
Yeah, I
family
think
was
it
in the
was
metal
beyond the
business
pale.
too,
Oh, interesting. Very interesting.
in Vadovic. So, which was further south, and I know it wasn't in the Pale of Settlement.
Okay.
And that's how their company survived so long, but 400 years is incredible.
And I know that my grandfather had his own business, and then he was in partnership with a few other gentlemen. But I can't, so far, that's about all I have.
You don't know what it was called.
I don't.
Wow.
There's a museum in Warsaw that goes through a lot of detail. I'm sorry, I'm Julie, and I don't have my picture on, but it goes through a lot of that, and that might be a place that you could track it down, because they do a lot of detail at that particular museum. I do have a question. Did your dad ever talk about happy times as a youngster, or was it completely changed once the war happened and there was no memory of that time?
With me, he only talked basically about happy times. Like I said, I was maybe the end of high school or beginning of college and taking a couple of courses on the Holocaust when he did start talking more about his experiences, but he never went into great detail. And when he was getting to be very sickly, I tried to ask as much as I could without trying to tire him out or make him feel very bad. I got a lot of information. He did talk about his siblings. He talked about his parents and a lot about aunts and uncles and vacation and growing up, things like that. But the details, the terrible details, I didn't know until I listened to the tapes that
Did he ever tell your mom?
Yes. Yes, he did. I know he did. And I know as a kid, I remember him having terrible nightmares. I didn't know why, but I know my mother knew. And she helped him through the years when he was applying for compensation and giving his testimony. She wrote things out and typed them up, so she knew it in detail.
I'd like to ask a personal question, and you don't have to answer it. How did your father feel about his Jewishness? Was he highly identified? Did you belong to synagogue? Because after the war, there were two kinds of people, people that got turned off from Judaism and others that immersed themselves. So I was curious if you want to answer that question.
He highly identified himself as a Jew. He was very proud. He wasn't happy with organized religion here because after he came over and he wanted to go to services, they asked for money and he didn't have money. So the organized part wasn't the greatest for him, but he was very well read, very scholarly, very staunch supporter of Israel, anything he could do. And he was never ashamed to say what he was.
Lee, did you ever have any experiences with your father where something you did or someplace you went reminded him of a childhood experience he had before the Holocaust?
Oh, that's a good question. Maybe just, I think he loved nature. We went to Frick Park a lot. Like I said, we would play soccer, we would hike, we would walk around. And I think that probably reminded him of growing up. And in the summer, his family went to the mountains. They spent a lot of time vacationing. So that probably nice pre-war things, I think.
Did he have
Lee,
health issues
you're-
afterwards?
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, Lee, this is Regine.
Hi, Regine.
Hi,
Regine,
Lee.
I have to tell everyone, Regine helped me put my book together. So she's in tonight from Morgantown.
Thanks to Zoom. I was just wondering if you could say a bit about what Jason thinks or thought about you doing all this work and saving this story for the family and future generations.
That's a nice question. He just gave the thumbs up. I think he's very happy that I have pieced things together. It took me 4 years to, as you know, to put this book together. I thought it was going to be a little under a year and I would have it, and it was just going to be just magically appearing. I did a lot of research, a lot of genealogy, and I think Jason's happy to be able to look at a family tree and now know that we have some relatives and we're close with people we didn't know we had. So I think he's pleased with the process.
When I put you in speaker view and I see your back wall, that looks like a flow chart of research. Is that what it is?
Oh. Oh, it's photos from various places we've been to. Yes.
Oh, okay. I'm interested in hearing more about the manor. It was broken. It had different stores in it, not only ground floor, but the second floor as well.
The second floor, you entered on Darlington Road.
Okay.
And you went up, like 23 steps. There were many, many steps to go up. And the only things that were up there was at the time when we were in business, there was an accountant had an office. There was a person that had an apartment, and there was our store that was there. And at the top of the steps, there was a landing. And if you opened the door and you went out onto the landing, if you turned right, you would see the projectionist from the Manor Theater. And if you went straight, you went down fire escape steps that led to the backs of some of the buildings. So that's basically what was on the second floor.
Wow.
I think that door is still there. It's part of Silky's now.
It is on the side of Silky's, yes.
Yeah, it's the door, but the door is still there.
Lee, this is Tony in Davina. I have a question. First of all, I commend you for telling your father's story. I agree. It's just so important. Did you ever happen to network with other children of survivors in your work?
And when I go to the Holocaust Center, they're the generational speakers. Some of them are second generation, some of them are grandchildren. I have spoken with some of them. I didn't really do any research with any of them when I was working on my book. I paid attention to what the generational speakers were talking about and trying to put their stories together. But this project, basically, I did it on my own.
Okay. I do remember the Shady Hotel. I was a dear aunt of mine who passed away not too long ago. I was her ring boy a couple of years before your parents got married there.
Interesting, very interesting. That was right near Minatello's, I think.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. But thank you. Thank you for your work.
Thank you for your comments. I appreciate that.
There's something in the chat. Oh, very nice.
from Skip. It was your dad and mom would be proud of you, Lee.
Thank you, Skip. It's a friend of ours who knew my parents very, very well.
Lee, can I ask you a question as a writer? This is Julie. You said that you hadn't written anything before. How were you able to form it, discipline, find a way to make the text move together, blah, blah, blah? I see you shaking your head, so I'm curious to hear what you have to say.
Great question. Like I said, I really wanted to get it right, and I had no idea. I am not a writer. That is not what I did for a living. And I just knew I had to honor my father's wishes, so I had to start somewhere. So after I found Ray Jean and we started talking, we just started putting testimony, trying to put things, one of the hardest things was putting things in chronological order, because my dad gave various testimony. Then on the tapes, maybe things were a little bit different. So we had to make it as close as possible. And I think one of the best things we did was part one of my book is all in my father's words. So I had the tapes transcribed and then reviewed. I listened to the tapes, read the transcription, and Ray Jean and I decided to keep my dad's words as close as possible. There were a couple of things we couldn't understand, and we made mention of that. And then the second part of the book is really my memories and my recollections. So I just tried to pick various stories that I could tell, things that I could remember, and fill in some of the details. My father went up to like 1979. He passed away in 96, and I wanted to just, fill in what else he did when he retired. And then the appendix, I just put as much information. There are pictures, there are postcards, like I said, all the ephemera. And there are maps in there. It tells his journey from his city all the way to liberation and coming to the United States. And Julia, it's quite involved.
Did he?
Oh,
Go
just
ahead.
a quick comment about the transcriptions. So Lee mentioned that her father didn't know English when he arrived in Pittsburgh, but he knew Polish, German, Yiddish, and Hebrew. So those tapes he made were they were in English, but other words in other languages were thrown in. So that was also a challenge with the transcriptions. Had to do a lot of research on just different words he was using.
But along those lines, did he tell you where he learned English? Was that the Irene Kaufman settlement still teaching?
No, I think he went to Shenley High School, I
Or
think.
Shenley High School, okay.
Yes,
It was a little later than.
Yes, that's where he went to learn English, yes.
I see. Okay, thank you.
So where is your book available?
My book is available. The closest place as far as Squirrel Hill is Riverstone Books in Squirrel Hill. You can look on my website. I have every place that has it locally. And if anybody wants a copy signed and you want something more specific, you can get it from me as well. It's also on Amazon. But I do invite you to check out my website. Maybe my son can put my website in the chat. And it's probably about a half a dozen places in the area.
I have a question. Turn that down. When I was teaching, I did, mine is off. Well. Okay, does that work? Okay. All right, there. Wonderful. When I was teaching, I had many, many survivors come to my classroom to talk to my students when we were studying the Holocaust and World War II. And they all said that they were able to talk to other people's children about their experiences, but they could not talk to their own children. And I am wondering how you feel as the child of a survivor. How are you different, do you think, from other people of your generation? How did it impact you as a child?
I think my mother was from Pittsburgh, and my father obviously was not. I think that was made it a little bit easier for me. As far as how am I different, I think maybe my dad was so worldly. He talked so much more about what was going on in other places in the world, and the friends I had that didn't have parents as survivors maybe did not have that experience. And my dad was very sensitive about things, so I don't know that I'm much different from anybody else. I hope I'm just in tune with the way things are going in the world.
Did your mother have a large family?
No, my mother was an only child. She did not have a large family at all and grew up in Pittsburgh. She lived in Squirrel Hill. She moved to Squirrel Hill right before 9th grade, and she went to Alderdice as well. But she lost her dad when she was 9, and it was not easy for my mother either. She had her own tough times.
I'm just wondering, when you were young, what happened on holidays like Thanksgiving, when you would hear your classmates talking about all the family that was coming to Thanksgiving dinner, and aunts and uncles and cousins, and there you were with your father and your mother and you. I mean, at what point did it occur to you to ask the questions?
Yeah, my mother used to say, what you don't have, you don't know. I didn't know any different. And I knew that there was not a lot of family, probably. And I mean, I guess I knew, but I didn't want to hurt my father by asking too much. So I pretty much waited till high school to say anything. But my one uncle did survive, and he, like I said, he came to Pittsburgh and he lived in Highland Park. So there was that part of the family. They weren't real close. We weren't all real close, but they were here as well.
Did your uncle have children?
Yes, 2 children, older than me. One passed away and one is still alive, and she lives in Florida. And we have contact every once in a while.
Were they involved with the book, or do they know about the book?
They know about the book. They weren't involved about the book. My one cousin already was deceased, and no, actually, my other cousin and I started to talk more after I wrote my book.
Did it affect them, since your uncle's experience were similar to your father's?
I think it affected them in different ways. My uncle was much more social as far as going to things with survivors. He was very active, and my dad was not. So I guess my cousins knew more of survivors' children. I didn't, I went to high school. I didn't know whose parents were survivors or not. It really wasn't talked about.
Lee, it's Regine again. I'm thinking of the I think it's in the introduction of your book where there are 2 or 3 stories of kindness from strangers. Do you know what I'm talking about? Do you want to share?
Sure, I can
Yeah.
share a story. When my dad came over to the United States, he got off the boat at Ellis Island and was waiting to board the train to come to Pittsburgh. He knew no English, and I think he said he had maybe 20 cents or something in his pocket. And when he boarded the train, a lady looked at him, and I guess she thought he looked tired, and she paid the porter for a pillow so that he could rest on his way to Pittsburgh. And he thanked her, and somehow he got her phone number, and I guess he kept in contact with her. So that was one of the stories. My dad could make friends with anyone. He really, really could.
Lee, did he ever tell you what gave him the will to persist in the face of such adversity?
He said that his father told him that he was the oldest, and no matter if he had to eat dirt from the earth, someone had to stay alive. And my dad said he kept that with him, and he just told himself he had to have hope. And he didn't know what happened to the rest of the family. He knew it wasn't good, and he just said he just had to will himself. He said, I could either die or I could force myself to try to live and get a better life. So I think he got that from his father.
By writing to General Gavin and framing his response, he was obviously aware of his survivorship, as his role as a survivor, and his sense that keeping that story or telling that story was part of his life. Did he have any other expressions of sharing his story or reaching out to other people?
He never went into the schools or anywhere to talk about his story. Like I said, he told me what he could. And I guess just doing those tapes, which he did by himself at his store, I think he knew that he had to preserve this to somehow have it be told. I just don't think he could do it himself.
Well, you did an extraordinary thing to record this and preserve it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I have to ask you a question, Eric. Did your mother have the preschool on Woodmont Street?
Yes, she did, and I'm still living in that house.
Oh,
were you
nice.
You a student?
I was, and I saw your name last month when Tammy did her talk, and I thought, oh my gosh, I bet you're Mrs. Marchbine's son. So nice to meet you.
I still have some of the furnishings that you may remember, the little chairs.
Oh my gosh.
The little oak chairs and the round table.
I look forward to meeting you one of these days.
Well, we'll do that at the next live meeting of the Squirrel Hill Historical Society.
Yes, we will. Your mother was a wonderful woman.
Thank you.
There's something somebody could talk about, Eric.
Mrs. Marchbine's Play School. I still see parents of the kids. I was much older than the children. They were 4 and 5 year olds, preschoolers, but I still run into parents who remember Mrs. Marchbine's school, and they tell me about their children who are in their 50s and 60s.
Are there any other questions?
I have one more question. Did your father ever express any feelings about the non-Jewish friends and neighbors that did nothing to try to help the family? Did he ever say anything about the United States government, where now we know, in fact, that there were lots of people in the government that knew what was going on in the camps and did nothing about it? The possibility of bombing Auschwitz, for example, and they said they wouldn't do it because they were only bombing military targets. I think the United States has a lot to answer for in what happened during the war, but I wonder what if your father ever talked about those things.
Well, first of all, as far as neighbors or anybody, they got taken over so quickly and put in a ghetto that he never talked about anybody, what they could have done in his city. As far as the United States, I have in his part 1 and in my book, he was not happy with some of the things that happened. He thought the United States, and he said even his father said that, where's the rest of the world when this is going on? So they did talk about it. They definitely did talk about it.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Are you continuing to pursue this? Do you have more things that you're trying to do or uncover or tell?
I'm going to continue to work on my genealogy. I do want to be a generational speaker, like I said, with the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh. And I know there are other places that look for speakers. And at this point, happy to tell my father's story. The stories need to be told. So it took me a very long time to get to the point where I would say I can tell this, or I can talk about this, or I could put it in some kind of order that makes sense. So I do want to pursue more. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know if I missed it. Did you talk about how your parents met?
I did not. My father was living with his brother on Denniston Avenue, and my father thought that it was time that he find a room for himself. And he went, I guess he found that there was a room available on Sharbrook Street. And when he went to take a look at the room, it was the house that my mother lived in, and that's how they met.
Oh,
Yes.
great.
Here's a little Jewish geography. What was her maiden name?
My mother's maiden name was Zerlstein.
Okay, thank you.
Not a common name.
You mentioned these tapes that your father made. Did he ever, was he ever involved with the Shoah Foundation? I'm having a senior moment. Who is the film producer?
Steven Spielberg. Yes. He did not make a tape. No, he did a written testimony to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, and we have a lot of information at Yad Vashem, but he never made a video. I wish he would have, but he didn't.
All right. Well, thank you, Lee. Again, it was a wonderful presentation, and I think very thought-provoking and and entertaining discussion. And again, if you'd like to purchase a copy of the book, it's A Perseverance, One Holocaust Survivor's Journey, available at local bookstores and online. So thank you very much, Lee. And I'll turn the program back over to Wayne if you'd like to talk about next month's program briefly.
Hey, thanks, Todd. Lee, that was great stuff. It's so important that you're able to document this stuff because, you know, it's first, secondhand information. See how people want to change what really happened. And it's great that you're able to document it and put it in a book. I think that's so important.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And getting back to, you know, our next month's meeting. Boy, here. It's characters of Taylor Alderdice.
Yeah.
That should be very interesting. And it'll be again the second Tuesday of the month at 7 o'clock. So we look forward to everyone joining in.